All right, well, let's go ahead in the interest of time and kick things off. Welcome, everyone. I'm Gabby Goldstein. I am co-founder at Sister District, and I am so excited to be here tonight in partnership with our friends at Teen Vogue to moderate this amazing Pride event tonight to celebrate and lift up trailblazing by pioneers from the LGBTQIA community who are making history in their state legislatures. And I'm really excited to discuss how important states are in protecting and expanding our rights, and why having more LGBTQIA folks in our state chambers results in legislative agendas and policy outcomes that better reflect the experiences and the interests and the priorities of communities in our state. So briefly, I'm going to pass the mic over to Allegra Kirkland at Teen Vogue to say a few words, and then I'll come back here to introduce our keynote speaker, Erin Reed. And then after Erin speaks, we'll dive into a panel discussion with our wonderful panelists. Couple of housekeeping items. We have closed captioning, and we will post that in the chat, the instructions for closed captions. We are recording this conversation, and we will host it on our website. And we should have some time for Q&A. Please post your questions in the chat. My sincere apologies if things run long and we are not able to get to your questions, but please do post them in the chat and we'll do our best. So with that, I would love to kick things over to Allegra Kirkland, the politics director at Teen Vogue, to say a few words.
Thank you, Gabby. Hi, everyone. So thrilled to be here. As Gabby said, I'm Allegra Kirkland. I am the politics director at Teen Vogue, and wanted to extend our sincere thanks to Sister District for being such great partners and for all their hard work putting this event together. So all the panelists here tonight were featured in our historic first series that we ran on Teen Vogue last year. And that series was all about, uplifting, inspiring historic firsts in states across the country. But we didn't want to just focus on, firsts for the sake of being firsts. We wanted to hear from these elected officials about how their identities informed the policies they championed while in office and how they really work to represent their communities. So we're going to get into that a lot more tonight. But yeah, for now, I'm going to kick it back to Gabby to introduce Erin.
Thank you, Allegra. It has been so fantastic to partner with you and your mighty team on our historic first series and on this event tonight. So as I mentioned, I am co-founder at Sister District, and for folks who are not familiar with us, our mission is to build progressive power in state legislatures. My co-founders and I started this organization because we saw a gap in organizing capacity and resources, going to folks running at this level of the ballot and serving in this at this level of government. And I always say progressives are tardy to the party when it comes to paying attention to states. As we all know, conservatives have been systematically building power at all levels of government, including at the state level, for generations. And these are such important venues of power. They have such an outsized impact on every policy that we care about, including environmental justice issues, abortion access and reproductive justice, and of course, LGBTQIA rights. And no one is following state level policy on these issues closer than journalist Erin Reed, who is tracking LGBTQ legislation around the US for her newsletter, erininthemorning.com. Her work has been cited by the AP, Reuters, the New York Times, the Washington Post. The list goes on and on. I'm so thrilled that she's able to join us tonight and kick off this conversation. So Erin, I'll pass it over to you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak to all of you today. So over the last 4 years, I have tracked over 1,000 bills targeting the LGBTQ community. I think I have read over 1,000 bills. And these bills, most of them target trans people. And whenever I say that I've read over 1,000 bills targeting LGBTQ and trans people, I've really only read 30. And there's a reason why I want to really cap that off right now, is that all of these bills, they're not coming from some groundswell of support against LGBTQ people. These are not being clamored for in our communities. They're being written by a select group of very extremely well-funded Christian nationalists who are sending the bills out to particular politicians who are going to run all of the anti-trans and anti-queer legislation. What do these bills do? Well, some of these bills ban us from bathrooms. And if I use the same bathroom that I have been using for the last 6-7 years, I could be arrested and jailed for up to a year in the state of Florida. Some bills force transgender youth who have been stable in their gender identity for years to detransition. Many of these bills ban LGBTQ people and books that contain LGBTQ stories from telling those stories. So we're talking about things like drag bans, for instance, that have a long history of being weaponized against the LGBTQ community at large. The reason why we have Pride, the reason why I am speaking today on this month right now, is because of anti-trans and anti-queer drag bans that were used to raid gay bars in the 1950s and 60s, first in Compton Cafeteria, and then later in Stonewall. And in fact, the first anti-drag ban of the modern era of the last 5 years was enforced against a transgender public speaker speaking in a library against trans history. As we stand right now, over 25 states have explicit anti-LGBTQ laws that do a variety of things. This is actually every single state that is currently under Republican control. And they're doing it in order to push a very fundamentalist view of what America should be. The idea that the nation should be guided by a very narrow view of what Christianity says, and that anything that exists outside of that view, especially trans and queer people, should be made immoral or illegal. And if you look at documents like the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025, they spell out a future that they intend to bring us to. A future where my very existence can be considered pornographic, where I cannot have my own son live with me, where trans and queer people are pushed even further into the margins. And so whenever I think about this modern wave of anti-trans and anti-queer legislation, I always keep in mind who is pushing it. And that's important to keep in mind because something is happening right now, this year. Something big is happening. We are seeing signs that the anti-trans and anti-queer panic is receding. We are seeing signs that the public, the general public, is getting tired of these attacks, that it is enraging them. And we are also seeing signs that even the moderate Republicans in several of the states that have passed anti-trans and anti-queer legislation, they are sensing it and they're stepping back. I'm going to name some states that I've tracked very heavily over the past 5 years. Florida. Florida had 22 anti-trans and anti-queer laws that were proposed this year. 21 of them failed. The only one that passed was a DEI ban that's dead on arrival in court. Georgia. They had another 20 bills. They had a bill that would ban trans youth from bathrooms. If you would have asked me in the beginning of the year if Georgia would pass that bill, I would say yes, because I had never seen a bill like this fail in a mainly Republican legislature over the last 3 or 4 years. It failed in Georgia. They did not pass a single piece of anti-LGBTQ legislation there. The same thing in West Virginia, which is a notably conservative state. They tried to pass laws defining transgender people out of existence. About 20 bills failed there. The only bill that passed was a bill that would no longer allow them to put non-binary designations on birth certificates. They weren't doing that anyway. So we are seeing several states pull back. In Kansas, Governor Kim Reynolds pushed a bill herself, a bill that would require trans people to have markers on their birth certificates or driver's licenses that had both gender markers on them. We called it a pink triangle bill whenever it was pushed. And she submitted the bill directly because what is separation of powers? Apparently, Iowa, you can submit bills directly as a governor. And even that bill failed. In Arizona, we had a bill that would have sent it to the ballot, that would have basically begun a ballot referendum on transgender care, on forced outing, and more. And a Republican came up and said, I don't think we should be legislating this, and issued concerns about its constitutionality. And in California, a ballot referendum, all they needed to get was the signatures of about 1% of California's population. They couldn't get it. They could not find enough people to support anti-trans and anti-queer legislation. We are seeing major pullbacks. And in the end of 2023, Moms for Liberty, which ran almost exclusively on this issue, lost 70% of their races across the country. And we're not talking about in liberal school districts either. We're talking about places like Bucks County, Pennsylvania, or in Loudoun County, Virginia. These are the counties where on election night, if you're watching any of the CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, if you're watching any of those, they will zoom in to those counties. And Moms for Liberty was wiped in those counties. In Bucks County, Pennsylvania, where one of the first Moms for Liberty candidates won back in, I believe, 2021, the two Moms for Liberty candidates that were not up for re-election, whenever they saw they no longer had power, you know what they did? They resigned. They left. Because they were not in there for bipartisan issues like teacher retention or grades or teacher pay. They were in there for two reasons and two reasons alone: books and bathrooms. People don't want this. Poll after poll after poll shows that people see this as a distraction, no matter what their personal opinions are on trans and queer people. They don't want their legislative time to be spent on this, because imagine if you are an independent or a Republican in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and you're concerned about what your kid is having as a teacher or what grades they're making. And you see that your school board is only focused on trans people. I don't care if you don't like trans people, you're going to get frustrated. The tide is turning. And the tide is turning because of local elections, because of state legislature elections, because of the elections that really, really matter in our local communities. I know that tonight you're going to hear from people who are really involved in these fights, really involved at the state level and at the local level. And this is where some of the most change can happen. The beginning of all of this, the beginning of this modern panic that we have found ourselves in and that we are hopefully finding ourselves out of right now, started in school board races, because a conservative group saw that as the easiest way to make inroads. And it's ending in school board races now, and it's ending in state legislative races now. And hopefully it will end nationally as well. I will continue tracking all of the anti-trans and anti-queer legislation as it moves across the United States. I'll continue tracking the hate groups, the victories, and the places where we have found struggles. But know this, the people that you are going to listen to tonight and the people that are on the ground doing this work every day, day in and day out, they see hope. They see hope on the horizon, and it's because of them. Anyway, thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to hearing from everybody else tonight.
Thank you so much, Erin. That is such a perfect way to lead into this conversation. And tremendous thanks. I know that everyone here agrees. So grateful for the work that you're doing in tracking this legislation, in bringing it to light, in keeping us informed about what's going on and what's at stake. It's absolutely vital and critical work, and we're very, very grateful to you for doing it. And I also wanted to thank you for mentioning the Christian nationalism that is infecting our legislatures and infiltrating our states. And I don't know if folks saw today, Rolling Stone published a secret recording of Justice Alito at a closed function in which, if you haven't checked it out, please check it out, in which he was asked by, or, you know, in conversation with someone posing as a conservative, where he was essentially asked, don't you think the country should be returned to a place of godliness? And his response was, yes, I agree. Yes, I agree. And so very clear, as if we needed any more proof, that the arch conservative majority, supermajority on this Supreme Court certainly is not on the side of rights and justice when it comes to so many of our communities. And that's what we're up against. That is exactly what we're up against. And because of what's happening in the Supreme Court, because of what's happening in so many of these areas that are returning rights back to states, that's part of the goal of this Supreme Court. Conservative jurisprudence, they really want to return power to the states from the federal level. We have to take the fight to the states. That's what we've got to do. And fortunately, we've got incredible folks in our state legislatures who are in the fight, and we're so incredibly lucky to have them. And so I'm thrilled to be joined by our panelists. We've got Arizona Representative Lorena Austin. We've got Washington Senator and future Congressperson Emily Randall. We've got Minnesota Senator Clare Verbeten, and I'm so thrilled to be joined by each of you. In the interest of time, I'm not going to do a long intro for each of you, but I would love for you to share a little bit about yourselves ahead of your first responses here. And so let's dive in. I think first, let's talk a little bit about how state legislatures play such a pivotal role in shaping every policy area that we care so much about, including LGBTQIA rights. And I'm curious what you've seen in your own states. What does the landscape look like for you in your own states? And the vantage point that you have looking across states, what does that look like? So perhaps we can start with Representative Austin, and then if we go over to Senator Randall and then Senator Verbeten. So Representative Austin, tell us, please. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Gabby. Thank you so much for having me. If you don't know, I'm the biggest Sister District fan of all time. I don't think I would have been elected without Sister District, and I wholeheartedly mean that. So thank you for all that you all do to elect progressive candidates across the country, and to Teen Vogue. Thank you so much for this partnership. It is so incredibly important to have the visibility nationally. So thank you. I'm also going to give a quick shout out to a few people from Arizona that I saw in here. So Tori, Stefano, and Carlin. Hi, thanks for coming and being a part of this. I am Arizona State Representative Lorena Austin. I have the honor and privilege of serving Legislative District number 9, which is Mesa and Tempe. I'm a 5th-generation Arizonan, and I now serve the district where my family has lived for over 100 years. I'm incredibly lucky. I come from a history of activism. My grandparents were farm workers, which led my parents to be involved in the Chicano rights movement. So always have been standing firm with unions and working class individuals. My father ended up being a civil rights attorney. My mom is a social worker and teacher, and I must have caught that bug because I ended up being an educator for almost 10 years in our Maricopa Community College system here in Arizona, and I miss it every day. But in 2022, I was elected as the first Chicane non-binary legislator in the entire country, and it's been such an honor to serve not only my state and my community, but the queer community. And so the landscape here in Arizona, as a lot of people have heard, and even Erin mentioned, thank you so much, has been, pretty stark, but there's a few things that have been in our favor, because I always want to, make it hopeful, because it is. And even though we have never seen more anti-LGBTQ legislation than we had this year, and we saw everything from the bathroom bills to the pronoun bills, we happen to have, thankfully, elected a governor for the first time in almost 30 years, who's a Democrat, who has been the backstop for stopping all of these bills, because they passed in Arizona. In Arizona, we're only down by 1 seat in each chamber, in the House and the Senate, from tying. So y'all, in November, you're going to see Arizona as being one of those major swing states we're hoping to flip, like Michigan. So but it can be disheartening, but I think it's also super important to understand that state legislatures are on the front line. I mean, we are seeing federal, protections being rolled back constantly. And so we are the new, like I said, we're holding the line for all of this legislation. And to Erin's point, it's not popular. You know, people are not calling my office, you know, really upset about LGBTQ people or queer people. I mean, that's just not what's happening. We know it's a narrative that the Republicans are holding on to because they are afraid of losing, because we're seeing it time and time again, not just in legislatures, but in school boards and other positions across the country. So I think it's just incredibly important that we pay attention to these state legislatures, because that's where the next fight is and will continue to be for quite some time.
Well, excuse me. I want to echo Rep. Austin's thanks to Gabby and Sister District for having us. It is incredible to be in community with folks who are fighting the good fight together. And similarly, when I ran my first race, I was elected first to the Washington State Senate in 2018. I wouldn't have won without the support of Sister District. I see someone from Burlingame, Sister District on the Peninsulas here in the chat. It was a Sister District on the Peninsulas fundraiser that helped push me over one of my big fundraising goals in my first race, where I flipped my state Senate seat in Washington from red to blue, and was elected as the first queer woman to the Washington State Senate. It was a really exciting race, one that I was motivated to jump into because of the 2016 election, because of the attacks on our communities happening at the federal level, because of, you know, the promises that Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans and right-wing extremists had made to take our rights away, to undermine, you know, the rights that we had fought for, the rights that I had grown up taking for granted. I worked at Planned Parenthood at the time of the 2016 election, and it was really reproductive rights policy and LGBTQ healthcare that was a catalyst for me. And I'd grown up in a family, a bipartisan family, where we experienced, you know, complex healthcare needs. I had a sister born with really severe disabilities who benefited from Medicaid. I had a dad who was a Republican but had a good union job at working as a shipfitter for the federal government. I understood the importance of unions for working families. I understood the importance of Medicaid for a safety net. I knew that Washington State could make life better for people because I had seen it for myself. And so when I ran in 2018, it was to build on that strong history and to make sure that Washington was in a position to protect the families and the rights in our community that we cared about so much. And people often think of Washington as a real blue state. And, you know, we vote for a Democratic president every cycle. But when I was first elected, we had just retaken the Democratic majority in the state Senate. We had been in divided government. But in 2018, because of the wave that Sister District helped catapult, I was elected alongside 4 other incredible progressive folks who were also younger, who were also more diverse, who were queerer, who were browner, who had immigrant stories, and who helped change the shape of the legislature, who have helped pass some of the most progressive reproductive rights protections, who have helped to pass some of the country's strongest LGBTQ protections, who have passed climate legislation. And it's because of local elections like you are investing in when you get involved in Sister District. So, you know, our work is important at the state level. It's so important to shape what is possible. And when states like Washington and Oregon and California and can, you know, really set the bar, and states like Arizona can continue building momentum, then, you know, the federal government will have to keep up eventually. And, you know, I'm running for Congress now because I think we need strong partners there, and I'm not willing to give up hope on our country. But I am forever grateful to the incredible leadership of state legislators around the country who are really leading the way.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so excited to be in such great company. And My name is Clare Oumou Verbeten. I use she, her pronouns, and have the honor of representing District 66 in the Minnesota Senate. That includes St. Paul, our capital city, Roseville, Falcon Heights, Lauderdale, some of our suburban cities as well. And I would just say us being in power really makes a difference. And I ran for office in 2022, which was an amazing year for us here in Minnesota, where we flipped our Senate and we won a trifecta. And in doing so, we also created a legislature that started to actually reflect our communities. So I, alongside two other amazing Black women, Zainab Mohammed and Erin McQuaid, made history as the first Black women to serve in the Minnesota Senate. Erin McQuaid and I were two of the first Black queer women to serve in the Minnesota Senate. We had a majority women caucus in our DFL, Democratic Farmer Labor Caucus, elected our first Black president, our largest ever queer caucus between our Senate and our House. And I take special pride in my district, which is, as far as we know, our only all queer district. So in Minnesota, we have the senator and then two House seats, an A and B side for each seat. And so I serve alongside Representative Lee Finke, who in 22 became our first trans legislator, and Rep. Athena Hollins. So we are really proud to be Minnesota's queer district in 66. And we just got in 22, and then in the 23 legislative session, we got to work and had an absolutely amazing transformational legislative session where we, day one, protected reproductive access with our PRO Act. We banned conversion therapy. We made Minnesota a trans refuge state, so we could really protect people from these awful laws that we were seeing in other states. We just this year ensured that folks have access to gender affirming care in insurance coverage. We created a council on LGBTQIA Minnesotans, and we passed a Pride Act. I carried that bill, which updated our human rights statute that had some really awful outdated stereotypical language about us as queer people. The list goes on. We did a lot of stuff, and none of that would have been possible without us being there and being at the table. And then this year as well, I was elected as an assistant majority leader for my caucus, continuing to really advocate for queer justice and racial justice at that level. So we've done amazing things in Minnesota. I like to point out that we were the first state to defeat one of those really awful like marriage amendments that they were working on. And then later, after we defended that on the ballot, we're able to pass marriage equality. So we like to be leaders here in Minnesota too, give some of these other states a run for their money. But we've been doing amazing work because of this beautiful and diverse legislature that reflects our beautiful and diverse community here in Minnesota.
Incredible. Thank you so much to each of you for your service, for showing up and in your whole beautiful selves and doing this work. It's reading the chats, you can see it's totally inspiring, and we are so thrilled to be here in community with you. I'm curious what your top legislative priorities are for advancing LGBTQIA rights, and that differs based on the context that you're serving in, right? Lorena, your options are different for a legislative movement than in a state like Washington, and it sounds like in Minnesota, where you're able to really push the envelope. I'd be really curious what the priorities are and how you work with the communities out there in your state on that, what we sometimes call inside outside the dome strategy, right? You can have all the plans you want about the legislation you want to push, but you really need advocates in the community who are going to show up. They're going to, testify on behalf of the bills or against the bills that are coming through. How do you build those and maintain those relationships with the community? And how does that how does that work for you? So maybe we can go around again, Lorena, Emily, and Claire.
Sure. Yeah, it can be complicated, and congrats to Minnesota too. I wrote down and scribbled some of those ideas, so I'll be reaching out to you, Senator, when we flip Arizona, because those are exactly the types of things that I aspire to do. So things like healthcare, right? Things like the things that really come to mind really quickly. But I also think of what we've also seen in Arizona are attacks on our public universities and defunding education. I mean, these are massive, massive issues. Because as we see constantly just pushbacks, I mean, in Arizona, they passed ESA vouchers, universal vouchers, which I know a lot of other states are looking at. And right now, they are, there's no really mandates around how these funds are really distributed. And we are now almost $1 billion, and we will be $1 billion in deficit because of this type of spending. But it's very clear that the Republicans are trying to disenfranchise and destroy public education. So there's so many things going on in tandem, right? And so it's really important to get that messaging out, like you mentioned, Gabby, to our community members. And I'm so lucky that Arizona has such a strong community that spans along many different organizations and entities. So everything from AZ Typo, we have GLSEN, we have HRC Arizona here, we have 1 in 10. So Arizona, we have Transqueer Pueblo, and a lot of other entities that are Young Democrats. We have some of them online too, our MCYD Young Democrats here in Arizona. So it is really important to keep those lines of communication open. And it's really important that entities also come up and support. So an example I'll give really quickly was I went viral, I think a few months ago, because with Planned Parenthood, we hosted a drag story hour at the Capitol in the basement when no one was even really there, because our session's kind of weird right now. And it just went haywire. Just the idea of having simply 20 adults in a room listening to poems about, our strong elders and LGBTQ activists and politicians really triggered, the Republicans. And they tried to demonize me and said that, I was being deceitful about everything, when I had actually worked with the Republican Speaker's office to get this scheduled. So I think it's just an example of how we really are changing the narrative, though, right? I didn't do things to score cheap political points. If I had tried, I should have done it on a day when everyone was there, type thing. But I'm just really trying to normalize our community in this sense. But I'm so grateful for the organizations that are also helping in tandem. We call that shared governance, right? And I do think that's very, very, very important, no matter what we do or any issue we tackle. But again, it is broader than just, LGBTQ plus or queer issues. It is so much larger than that and broader. And we have to be mindful of how these little bills chipping away. In the past 20 years in Arizona, where we've only 20 plus years, we've only had Republican control. We're now seeing the really drastic effects that that's having on the state, which is why it is so imperative that we flip the legislature this year.
So, over the past 6-7 years since we took control of the Washington State Senate, we've passed an incredible suite of policies that have made life better for all Washingtonians, including LGBTQ folks. We've passed some pretty significant healthcare expansions to cover gender affirming care, to protect the privacy of LGBTQ youth who are seeking gender affirming care, reproductive health care, mental health care, and behavioral health care. We've passed some really strong paid family and medical leave, and then gone back year after year to expand the definitions of family to ensure that everyone is covered by our paid family and medical leave program. We've worked in public contractor discrimination protections, and worked to ensure that trans youth who are not supported at home have safe access to accommodations in homeless shelters and other places without worrying that their unsafe family of origin will get information about where they are immediately. I work a lot on healthcare expansions and have passed some anti-discrimination policy, some health equity policy to ensure that medical providers continue to be required to take medical equity training after they're licensed year after year, to make sure that our medical schools are teaching a curriculum that is both anti-racist and anti-discriminatory and celebrates LGBTQ healthcare. We've passed, gender inclusive sex ed. This year we fought book bans to ensure and required proactively schools have more inclusive curriculum. We work to ensure that libraries aren't closed because of this kind of anti-LGBTQ, anti-book organizing that we see in communities. But a few pieces of undone work that I want to call out are, I've worked on policy over these last few years at the state level to try and create a regulatory structure to keep hospitals and health systems from merging and consolidating and getting bigger and bigger, especially because in Washington state and in a lot of states around the country, those consolidations are religious affiliated health entities. So not only do we have the challenges of consolidation that lead to price increases and additional red tape and farther decision-making entities from staff and patients, but we also see health systems that are less and less likely to provide gender-affirming care, reproductive health care, death with dignity, which is a voter-approved right in Washington state. And that work we got through the Senate this year, but couldn't get over the finish line in the House. It's challenging, but it is really important because that rate of consolidation is increasing nationwide. We also had some policy before the legislature on fertility coverage, mandating fertility coverage. And this is, for obvious reasons, really important to the LGBTQ community. And it is expensive. And, Washington state has created a number of insurance mandates that are not included in the ACA. We've expanded Medicaid in Washington to cover many things that are not mandated to be covered, and some that we can't even use federal Medicaid dollars to cover. So we have to put state money in, like health coverage for undocumented folks and postpartum. We've expanded postpartum Medicaid to 60 days before the rest of the country was pushing for it. We are using state dollars to cover incarcerated individuals to give them a Medicaid lookalike program, though we can't use state or federal money for that. So, the fertility piece is a cost that the state budget couldn't bear. We didn't have the votes for this year, but is one that we're going to keep fighting for so that we all have the abilities to choose whether or not to have a family and to build the families in the way that is right for us.
These are all so great. And I want to just start by saying a lot of the amazing work that we did in Minnesota was possible because of our Queer Caucus that was organizing and pushing for those bills. Me personally, I have really focused on the police accountability and criminal justice reform work. And I represent the district where Philando Castile was killed 8 years ago this July. Was a big part of why I decided to run for office, to really focus on racial justice and build a community where everyone feels safe. And, I was just frustrated not seeing people, especially in the Senate, focus on holding the police accountable for the police brutality that Minnesota was becoming known for, right? Philando's just one of our names. George Floyd, of course, sparking an entire worldwide, uprising. Dante Wright. And again, so many lives lost in Minnesota. And so it was just so shameful and frustrating to see that there wasn't that energy there. So I've really taken the lead on that work, which is like also queer justice work. We think about the intersections of, poverty and homelessness and substance abuse and brutality, and who really is, bearing the brunt of that, Black and brown, like queer people who get it the worst. And so we joked about how I was one of the co-authors on our bill to legalize cannabis in Minnesota, which we did, yay. And we talked about how legalizing cannabis was the queer agenda, because it's like we realized, all of us like authors here are all queer. This is great. I was really proud to work on the bill to essentially ban no-knock warrants here in Minnesota, and get to work directly with Amir Locke's father on that. I worked on Minnesota Connecting Families bill that provided free phone calls for incarcerated folks and their families. And that's also my list of things that we have to keep working on, because we don't have all communication services covered in there, and that's really important for our families. Banning the use of deception in police interrogations for juveniles. I need to get that across the finish line for all folks, but again, thinking about our young queer youth who are in this system and having those really awful experiences, and making sure that they're treated with dignity. And I also carried the bill to decriminalize drug paraphernalia and really make sure that we're not criminalizing addiction, and instead are getting folks the services that they need. So again, those are all, I think, our issues, and that's been a space for me to lead on, and I think has been really important, again, for our queer caucus, because we're representing our communities, and we all have different interests, and we do a good job of partnering with each other. And it's like, okay, Claire's going to take on that public safety work, she's vice chair there, and this person's going to take on our health and human services work, and this person's got the education stuff. I'm just so grateful to be serving in a time where I have that community and I have that caucus to really support me and have my back. So really excited about what we're doing in Minnesota, and there's definitely more work to do.
Always more work to do, but let's celebrate the wins. I mean, incredible work that you're doing, each of you are doing. And, bring some of what all of your comments brought to my mind two pieces. One is that while you're all in individual states, there's such a cross-pollination between states on the good side, and also as Erin spoke to us earlier, bill mills that are pushing similar policies around. And then also an interesting intersection, Emily, particularly curious for your thoughts, between conservative states that are pushing regressive policy and being aggressive with progressive states. And I've been following the Seattle Children's case that's kind of going on in Texas. And Emily, maybe you can speak to this briefly, but just so folks know, when Texas, their anti-gender affirming care bill went into effect, that bans the use of puberty blockers and hormone therapy for transgender youth. When that went into effect in Texas, they then went out to Seattle Children's Hospital and filed a petition to essentially, under the idea that folks from Texas youth from Texas were maybe coming to Seattle Children's to receive gender affirming care, that the AG's office in Texas, is bringing a case against Seattle Children's. So you have this interesting cross-state intersection between the laws in different states that could play out in a really strange way, in a really interesting way. A little bit of a tangent, but Emily, I'm curious if you can share with us any insight into that situation and how important it is for us to realize that what happens in one state, in a regressive state, can potentially come over into a more progressive state in these interesting and unexpected ways.
Yeah. I can't speak to the details of this case specifically, but we'll say that, that sort of specter and laws that have passed in Texas and Idaho around abortion and gender affirming care are some of the reasons that Washington has been so aggressive over the last couple of years in passing protections. We are not only worried about, Washingtonians being able to access care in Washington. With abortion bans across the country, with bans on gender affirming care, we have seen such an increase of individuals who do have to seek out care in blue states. Like a 75% increase in, abortion care in some of our Planned Parenthood clinics in Washington state. And it's not just people driving over from Idaho, it's folks who are flying quite far in order to access essential health care. And so some of the protections that we have passed and really had to pass have been, data privacy. The governor passed an executive order, and then the legislature went farther to codify to say that, Washington State Patrol and law enforcement will not participate in, anti-abortion, anti-LGBTQ healthcare cases that are brought from other states, because, people are being hunted. People are being hunted for accessing healthcare, and we will not be complicit in that. And we, in fact, see it as our duty to go even farther and ensure that anyone is safe here, that anyone who has to seek healthcare is safe here. In the last couple of years, we've passed budgets that have included practical support dollars for Planned Parenthood and other clinics who are providing this essential healthcare. Because it is so important. And we know that abortion funds and other nonprofit organizations in red states who are providing support for folks seeking all kinds of healthcare are being put out of business by these dangerous laws in red controlled states. And, I worry about even some of our strongest state policy under this U.S. Supreme Court. I worry about the decades-long plan to ensure that the court was in a position to pull back the progress we're making. It is up to the states to lead, and then it is up to us as people who live in this country to hold accountable our systems of democracy, including our U.S. Supreme Court. So, that's at the top of my mind as I think about what work is ahead in this next era for me. And it's ensuring that states like Washington and Minnesota and someday Arizona can continue to lead, and that we will not be at risk of being pulled backwards because of activist extremists on the court.
1,000,000%. And, I was fortunate to be at Guttmacher Institute last week for an innovation policy hub conversation where some of these cross-state issues and concerns, frankly, were raised. And I'm very excited that we're in good hands, lots of good policy folks and academics and lawyers and all the folks thinking through how we get ahead of states like Texas suing states with, for instance, shield laws, like Washington State and Minnesota, I'm sure, that protect folks providing and coming to the state for abortion care and all the rest. But these are real concerns, and I certainly share your concern about this arch conservative Supreme Court majority that is really purpose built, I should say, to dismantle federal rights and all the rest. And the other thing I brought to mind, Claire, I loved the way that you talked about the intersectionality between these sorts of policy issues that touch one another. And for instance, policing, you brought up criminal justice or policing, and it brings to mind that it's so connected to over-policing of queer and trans people, right? And that there's that intersectionality there. And certainly with healthcare, right? We're talking about gender affirming care, but it's also about abortion access. It's about queer youth mental health services, right? Education, there's so much intersectionality as well, not just book bans, but education about health and reproductive facts of, our bodies and all the rest. And so there's so much intersectionality and between the issues that we care about and the communities that we care about and the communities who we're fighting for and that brought us to service in the first place. So I really appreciated you bringing that to bear. Quick call for folks to put questions in the chat if you've got them. We may have time for them. But I wanted to sort of stay on that point for a moment. And I'm so curious for your perspectives. How do you bring your whole selves to this work? We all talk about intersectionality, so many identities, right? Our gender identities, the communities who we represent, all of the different ways that we identify. How do you all bring those experiences into your public service, and how does it make us all better for it, right? Because we're really, it's not it's not about, I think Allegra said this at the top, it's not about electing folks for, for the sake of representation just by numbers, right? There has to be substantive representation. Folks who we elect also have to really then pursue the policies that help us all get free. So I would love to hear how you think about that, how your own personal identity and your whole selves come into the work, and how that enriches the outcomes for all of us. So maybe we'll just go around in the same circle. Lorena, Emily, Claire.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, but I think that kind of speaks to the mission of Sister District and so many other organizations, is that we're looking for community representation first and foremost, right? And so when I ran, I didn't know I was going to be the first of anything. That was never my intention. I ran because there was no one running in our district that was actually from our district. It was a brand new district created from redistricting in 2022. And so people were moving out of crowded primaries just to run in an easier pathway to the legislature. And I didn't think that was right. Again, my family's lived in my district. I've been working. I didn't just decide to love my community. And if I wasn't a legislator, I would be doing the same thing, being in my community. So I think it speaks to that intersectionality and how I, represent myself. I don't go to the legislature thinking, oh, I'm the first non-binary Arizona legislator ever. I think of, oh, I'm Lorena from the hood, and I'm here to represent my people first and foremost. And I will be unapologetic about that every single day that I serve there. So I think that's the important thing, right? I'm not just queer, I'm so many other things. I'm a former educator, granddaughter of farm workers again. And I think that surprised people at the legislature, to be honest, because they wanted me to be the thing that they fear so much, but they have no clue about. They've never been around queer people or bothered to have a conversation with them. So if anything, I'm just normalizing what it is to be us. I think they thought I was gonna have rainbows shooting out of my fingertips and just be in your face about it. But if you know me, that's not how I am. I'm here to have a conversation and to collaborate. And my door is open to anyone. I've never refused a meeting with anyone, regardless of how we agree or disagree, and a lot of times disagree. So I think that's like the really big component and piece of all of this, is being your authentic self. And when we start electing legislators that are authentic, who are authentically from their community and know the needs of their community, not just acting like they do. I tell people, ask me about running for office, you have no damn business running for office if you don't understand your community. I'm not talking about you went to volunteer one time. I meant, do you know in your community who's helping small businesses, who's helping organizations, who really knows who's on the school board? Like, you have to be in the thick of it if you want to represent your community. So that's what I appreciate about that. But that intersectionality helps, because then our experiences that we've had really do filter to all of the policy issues that are here. So in Arizona, immigration, right, that's coming down. We're now have a bill, HCR 2060, that will go to the ballot that's modeled after SB4. And if you don't think LGBTQ issues are intertwined with immigration, then you're wrong. It's absolutely evident when we have judges that are misidentifying people that come before them. We are having people being put in danger, in really precarious situations. So I think it's more important than ever that you're right. It's not just about being queer and the numbers of being in the legislature, but I guess being queer does give you a lot of perspective and empathy and understanding as you're navigating these really difficult conversations and policy issues.
I resonate so much with all of what you said, but especially that last part. I think so often about how queer folks, particularly like queer people of color, people with intersecting identities, we're sort of by nature and necessity bridge builders. We have often had to be in multiple identities and multiple spaces, and are used to having conversations across division. Because we live in this world not alongside, a million other people who look exactly like us and share all of our experiences, but this is the life that we have grown up with, figuring out how to make connections across divides. And so when I, see my colleagues in the Washington state legislature and in legislatures around the country, who are queer people, who are queer people of color, who, are immigrants and have disabilities, who are really pushing us forward, often not in the way that people expected, you know, not in the rainbow shooting out your fingers in your face sort of way, but by storytelling and building those relationships and those trusted connections. I also didn't think that like being the first was the reason for me to run for office the first time or this time, but I do purposefully kind of lean into signaling to community. You know, I have an asymmetrical haircut. It's a little like plain messy right now, but I wear big hoop earrings. When I chair committee, I wear a HEFA nameplate necklace. I have like queer and feminist art all over my office. Yeah, I wear bright colors so that I'm not another gray suit on the dais. It matters to me to signal, especially to the student organizers who I worked with a lot as a chair of higher ed and workforce development, that you know you can show up as yourself and deserve to be in a position of power. You don't have to look like all of the other people who are historically in power in order to belong. And you know, I think that it makes a difference for all of our colleagues, you know, straight white cis colleagues too. I remember, you know, my first year when another member of the healthcare committee sent me an email during committee to ask the difference between MTF and FTM, because we were having a conversation about gender affirming care and he didn't know. And he was like, felt like he could ask me. And at first I was like, you know, now I'm the queer person that explains everything. But I think it matters to be able to have safe places for our colleagues to learn, to hear stories, and to sometimes then go out and do some more reading and research themselves, so that we can continue to build a democracy that is more representative and that is more understanding, even amongst the folks who are more used to being in positions of power.
I want to say ditto to all of this. I think that signaling is important. And if you come to my office, you will see my pansexual flag flying. And we just got a new state flag in Minnesota. Really love it. And the flag lends itself to all these different variations you can do. So there's like a pride version of the new flag. I've got that up in my office too. And those things I think are especially important for our young people to see when I have students coming and visiting me at the Capitol, and they're really excited to see that. And talk about, oh, I'm queer too. And like, right, like that's so just validating and affirming for them. And I think that's part of like the importance of being loud and proud about it. When I first ran, did a big drag show fundraiser, which was just like really fun, and a way to just be really proud of who I am in my community. But again, also like grew up in this district, and the proud daughter of a Senegalese immigrant and second generation Dutch American. My dad's a former high school teacher, union member, all those things I bring, you know, to the table. I'm an organizer who worked on a bunch of campaigns and helped elect other people to office before getting here. I led racial equity work at the city of St. Paul. I did a lot of work for my school district, and raised funds for desperately underfunded schools, you know, before the DFL trifecta took over and put a lot of funding there. But all those things are really important. And I wouldn't be a Minnesotan without saying the famous Paul Wellstone quote, "We all do better when we all do better." My tweak to that would be like, we all do better when queer people do better. We all do better when Black people do better, when people of color do better, right? Like when we focus on the most marginalized, everyone benefits. And a bill that I had this year that I think really represents that had overwhelming bipartisan support was a bill to rewrite our driver's test using plain language standards. And my mom, who a Senegalese immigrant, came to this country many years ago, she had to take that test 8 times. And because the test was unnecessarily wordy and had these double negatives and wasn't in the present tense, and it was testing your understanding of the English language, not like your understanding of Minnesota traffic laws. And of course, when she took the actual road test, like passed it right away. And there's this amazing English language learner teacher who I worked with on this bill, who was studying it and seeing that her students were really struggling. It was a big issue for English language learners, for folks with disabilities. And so we passed that bill. Again, overwhelming bipartisan support. My Republican colleagues were like, I love this bill. Let's change everything into plain language standards. I'm like, yes, let's do it. Let's work on more bills next year. But just, I think when we focus on, again, those who have just kind of been hit the hardest, like everyone really benefits. And so that's why we need more queer representation.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Thank you so much to our incredible panelists for sharing your experiences, the rich tapestry of your experiences, your identities, your priorities, the ways in which you're able to bring your whole selves into this work. And we're all better for it. Paul Wellstone is right. And Claire, you're right. We're all better. We all do better when we all do better. We all do better when queer people do better. And there's no better way to end this conversation than with that. I hope everyone's feeling inspired to get involved with state legislative policies and leaders and elections. And I'd love to kick things over for just a minute to Allegra to share a few ways that Teen Vogue, opportunities that Teen Vogue has for that.
Thank you, Gabby, and thanks to all of the panelists. That was phenomenal. You all are terrifyingly inspiring. And yeah, if you want to check out the whole Sister District series that we ran on Teen Vogue, Historic Firsts, you're welcome to do that. You can read the pieces with these 3 elected officials. And if you want to keep up to date with sort of what's going on with Teen Vogue politics, you can sign up for our newsletter, the Teen Vogue Take. And also just wanted to flag 2 exciting projects we have coming out later this month. One is a profile of Montana State Representative Zoe Zephyr. And she was actually censured by her colleagues in the legislature for fighting against a ban on gender-affirming care. So that piece is coming out later this week. And then we also have a whole package running later this month about the recent crackdown on protest and dissent in the United States called the United States of Suppression. So please check those out.
Amazing. And I'll just type a few Sister District things. We are running national phone banks for progressive candidates running in competitive state legislative races this year. Bella will pop in a link if you want to join us. It's a lot of fun. If you want to join us as a volunteer, please do. Bella is also popping in the link to join us. We have over 50 teams, active teams and affiliates. Lorena and Emily, thank you for your shout outs. Our teams absolutely loved supporting you guys and all the rest. And then we have another event coming up in partnership with Red Wine and Blue, virtual event on the 2nd anniversary of the Dobbs decision. We'll have some really great speakers and really get into the state of repro rights and the fight for repro justice in our states on June 24th. So please do join us. And so that's really it. I'm just very grateful to all of our speakers. Very, very grateful to Erin Reed for taking time from her night to join us as well. And to all of you for this celebration. It is an absolute celebration. And thank you so much. And we will follow up with an email to all of you with a link to this recording when it's up. Thank you. Have a great night. Happy Pride.